Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the keynote speech for our conference, Maximising Your Potential. My name is Sue Staunton and I'm Joint Managing Partner of James Cooper Creston. And I'm delighted to welcome our keynote speaker, James Bellini, who's kindly joining us today. With our focus throughout today's conference on the importance of businesses looking forward in order to maximise their potential. As a leading futurologist, Dr. James Bellini will be providing us with insight into the future of the environments that we will all be operating in. James has spent more than 25 years as a respected TV broadcaster, futures analyst and writer, with a strong focus on social, economic and technological trends over the next 10 to 20 years. After an early academic career, James joined the US headquartered futurology think tank, the Hudson Institute, as its first British member. He then moved to the BBC to present the Money programme, Newsnight and Panorama, and then to independent television as presenter, writer and narrator of a wide range of award-winning documentary series, current affairs programmes and environmental reports. For 7 years, he was studio presenter with Financial Times Television and Sky News. James has a Master's in Law and History from the other place, Cambridge, and a PhD from the London School of Economics. In 2007, he was elected Fellow of the World Innovation Foundation, founded by Nobel laureate Glenn Theodore Seaborg. And in 2015, he was awarded the Professional Certificate in Coaching with Merit by Henley Business School and University of Reading. He's also a member of BAFTA. So, James, over to you.
Thanks very much, Sue, and good afternoon to everybody. Yes, as you say, I'm a member of BAFTA, and we're bang in the middle of the awards season. I'm on one of the judging panels for movies. Kept us very, very busy these days, and I'm not going to tell you who's going to win because I'm a futurologist and I don't really know what's going to happen. And I think I'll start with a very simple introductory comment, really, that as a professional futurist, as Sue said, I'm often asked to give answers about what might lie ahead and, you know, who's going to do this and where that's going to go and so on. But actually, as I'll try and demonstrate in my session now, it's actually far more important to actually ask the right questions, not to look at the right answers. And on that point, please do feel free, if you want to submit any questions to our hosts this afternoon, and I'll do my very best to go with them. Okay. So here we go. As you can see, this is the brain map of the futurist on the screen now. This is a very holistic discipline, drawing, as I do, on many and varied sources of ideas and knowledge. And can I have the first movement up? Thanks a lot. On the left, top left there, I'm an historian by training, I suppose. My website calls me an historian of the future. But you know, next one, please. Top right, I'm becoming much more of a sociologist. I realize now that to understand how things will evolve in the next 5, 10 and possibly 15 years, we really do have to think about human behavior and human expectations and conduct and that sort of thing within business and within everyday life. So I think that's really where I go. Now, the point of all this is really I draw on all these sources of knowledge. And if I read a book or read an article that's really, really interesting or insightful, or I hear a speech at an event like this, maybe, or simply overhear a conversation in which I think, wow, I never thought of it that way, I will take it and I will use it. And I'll always, as I'll demonstrate, actually tell you where I got it from and give full credit. So that's me. Now, the point of this, next one, please. The point of this is actually to sit back a bit more. And that's really what we do in the futurology game. Seeing the big picture. The big picture are all there in the smaller details, but if you put them all together, they are in effect pieces of a big jigsaw, the big picture jigsaw. And so you get an holistic view of the world outside, which I think is of absolutely vital importance to any business leader in any company or business of any shape, size or heritage. If I have the next one up, please. I'll kick off with a sort of health warning, if you like. No business functions in a vacuum, and I meet many, many decision makers who actually think that this thing called the future is this something that happens to other people or other organizations, never to them. Or they may think, well, it's going to happen in July of 2025, so I can sit back and watch the cricket or whatever we do when we're not doing anything about the future. Actually, the real world is where we live, and the real world is being transformed by a surge of disruptive innovations, changing public attitudes, and so on, and of course, currently an unforeseen and unpredictable pandemic. I shall embrace that as an issue as we go forward. If I can just go to the next one. I just thought I'd kick off, though, by getting your brains moving a little bit about what the shape of things to come might actually look like. Let's have a look at Horizon 23 and a glimpse of things to come. By then, we're probably, if we take a plane from Manchester or London to, say, Paris, short haul, it'll probably either be a solar-powered plane or an electrically powered aircraft. And you might think, where do you get all this stuff from? It's already out there, by the way. It's in the laboratories. It's in the prototypes. Our urban centres, our cities, by 2030 onwards, will be increasingly looking like this. Could be. Green spaces, vertical farms, growing our food on the outskirts of towns and cities rather than out in the rural areas of large plains, if you like, horizontal plains. I think in 100 years' time, people will look back at our time now and think, you know what, they used to grow their food on these enormous horizontal landscapes, when in fact by then we'll all be growing most of our food either above the ground or below it. Hence the sort of march of technology. Talking about the march of technology, there is something that by 2030 could well be in position, which is quantum computing. Now, the only thing you can say about quantum computing is that it's mega fast. Millions and millions and millions of calculations within a nanosecond, and it could have completely transformatory impact, I think, on the way we all do things and the way we all live. Okay, next one. Glimpse of things to come. I think we're going to see airships making a comeback. Actually, they're very sustainable. They're very low cost, ideal for long distance bulk transports. And these airships you can see here can actually dock in harbours. They don't have to fly around the sky. So that's something to look forward to if that's the sort of business you're in. Shipping will be a bit more returning to the sails, really. EcoShip 2030. It runs on solar or wind power, hence the sails. And it'll be possibly even pilotless, like a drone. It won't even have any crew on board. So that's another thing. We often think about, will there be flying cars, as they saw in, Back to the Future and all that? Well, I've seen them. I've been to a plant in Massachusetts in the States where they're already building them. They're not as fancy as these, but they will be one day. So that's how you'll commute, perhaps, powered by electricity or hydrogen, and probably driverless as well. And then a final quick bunch of things to look forward to. 3D printing and perhaps one day 4D printing. We will be able to print human organs. This is obviously a human heart. Here is 4D printing. I won't go into that in great depth, 4D, but by the time you've actually got a handle on 3D printing, along comes something else. We'll never offline by that time. We'll be, in effect, linked up, hyper-connected, if you like, to the world around us. I think one final thought, actually, I forgot to say that if you want a nose job, actually in Sheffield University, they're already developing a way of using 3D printing to develop the perfect proboscis. So they reckon they can do it in a couple of days. So anyone who wants to sign up for that, this really gives you an impression of how the world is moving on at pace. And if you're looking forward to a bit of lunch, by 2030, it's probably going to be something like this, sushi with insects, because insects are going to be the future of protein. And you might think, what a horrible thought. Well, I might remind all of you that on the world today, around 2 billion, that's billion with a B, capital B, 2 billion people already eat insects as part of their everyday diet and have in fact done so for millennia. So I think we're about to join them. Rich in protein, very low in environmental impact. Agriculture, for example, uses up massive amounts of water. And red meat is probably the great enemy of the environment as well in the long run. 2030, that'll all, I think, be changing. Okay, let's get down to business. Quick thinking there about 2030. A future shaped by disruption. This little quote here by Ray Kurzweil, who himself is a great visionary, invented flatbed scanners and so on, by the way. He's chief engineer at Google, a pretty smart guy. although he can be a little bit excessive, I suppose. Here he's saying because of the explosive nature of exponential growth, the 21st century, this century, will be equivalent to 20,000 years of progress at today's rate of progress. Well, come on, Ray, it's a bit over the top that, but you know, you get the picture. We're going to see more innovation, more disruptive innovation in the 20th century, in the 21st century rather, in the next 10 years indeed, than we've seen in the whole of the 20th century. So that's the pace of change. That's the best way I can bring it to you. Okay, historical perspective here. We're really now in the middle of a movement towards harnessing the sixth wave. If we can just have that up on the top right. Next, let's see. There you go. If you can see it there, sustainability, artificial intelligence, and so on. This is the sort of stuff that we're going to see reshaping the world of business and the world of everyday life over the next 5-10 years and possibly beyond, taking you from the first wave way back to the days of the Industrial Revolution of steam power and water power and so on, right through to where we are now. So that puts it into a historical context. The problem, as this one shows, the problem is that technology grows at an exponential speed, exponentially, geometric, whereas human movement just tends to be linear. So there is a great and growing risk that there will be a growing gap, if you like, between human capacity and the way technology and innovation is raging on. But just to give you a very quick in perspective again on the pace of change, let's have a look at this one. And you put up the top left, there you go, the accelerating pace of change. For example, going back to the earliest time of human history, where the agricultural revolution to industrial revolution took about 8,000 years. Whereas if you look at the genome now, that's probably cracked in about 10. And by the time we get to the 2040s, we will be leading towards what we call the singularity, which the previous slide, Ray Kurzweil, actually invented. The singularity, ladies and gentlemen, is when machine intelligence meets and overtakes human intelligence. And I think a lot of you might find that a bit worrying, but it's certainly going to be a challenge, and we'll see what it's going to be like when we get there. So great big growing focus, if you like, on sustainable solutions, not simply technological ones, although obviously sustainability is driven by technologies. And what's happening to all of this? There's no single sector. None of the sectors that any of you are in with your businesses will be not affected. Everyone will feel the impact, whether it's how we grow our food, whether we transport ourselves, or bottom right here, with how we deal with each other and have our meetings. Food will be grown in laboratories increasingly. Healthcare will be radically changed. And as you see on the right there, the bottom right, we'll have our food being grown on the edge of cities and in vertical farm as well. So here we go. Where do we go now? COVID-19. Here we are, bang in the middle of it, of course. And in the top right, disruptive technologies, actually converging technologies as well. That's the point. It's the converging power of all of these. Why have I got a black swan at the bottom? Well, futurists talk about what's called a black swan event. A black swan event is something that's not in the plan. Why is it called a black swan? I'm told it's because when Europeans first went to Australia, they discovered, having come from a part of the world in Europe where swans were always white, they discovered that in Australia there are actually species of black swan as well. So it's now used in the business to denote something that came out of left field. It wasn't in the plan, and COVID-19 was certainly a black swan event. We didn't see it coming. Okay. The good news is, is it good news? I don't know. Having read, as I said earlier, read a lot. This is by the report from the McKinsey Global Institute, for example, and they've written a report just out a few weeks ago, a few months just before Christmas. What we're seeing is in the report, it says, quote, in red, a great acceleration of trends that already existed before the crisis. For example, online deliveries volume increased by the same amount in 8 weeks as it had over the previous 10 years, previous decade. And practically every area of business is going to be accelerated in this way, if you like. So if you take on the next one, that's a lot, thanks. Now, what does it mean for anyone running a business? It means that those companies any of you with resilient, future-ready business models positioned to ride all these trends, they have actually already pulled further away from their industry rivals, their industry peers, while those with legacy business models, in other words, old-fashioned ones, have, for the most part, fallen behind. That is the risk, and that is the challenge, ladies and gentlemen, how to ride these trends and how to make your own business more future-proof, and by looking at different ways of doing things, by going into different areas for products and services and whatever. So the pace of change we have all to manage now is being overtaken by a significant change of gear, the accelerator effect. Okay, let's move on. What I want to say here is I noticed in the months and indeed years before the COVID-19 outbreak, I noticed that there was actually the possibility of producing a new economy, a new business culture through various doorways. This book by Kate Wayworth, who's very well known within sustainability fields, by the way, Donut Economics, and as she says on the book cover there, 7 ways to think like a 21st century economist. Well, is the book already out of date? Is this promised new economy not going to happen? And what does it look at? Well, I'll quote here. Donut Economics offers a mountaintop view of the world with a central idea that gross domestic product, GDP in other words, is an ineffective way to measure an economy because it's only one-dimensional. Right, okay, but along comes COVID and along comes accelerator effect and all the rest of it. And is it going to sweep all these under the carpet? Will we see them just evaporating into thin air? Let's have another look at something else then, something probably a lot of us are more familiar with. What's going to happen to this part of the new economy that was gathering steam and gathering power before COVID came along, the sharing economy? Part of it's based on something they called enoughism, which doesn't sound very scientific, I know, but there you go. Enoughism is a theory according to which there is a point where consumers possess everything they need, and by buying more, it actually makes their life worse off. I think some of you might even actually work that one out for yourselves. Actually, on the cover of this particular book, top right-hand corner is an electric drill. And the mantra of the sharing economy can be simply summed up in the phrase, I don't need a drill, I need a hole in the wall. It's inverting the whole notion. So basically you hire it, you share it with your neighbor, and in return, he or she can share your lawnmower, for example. So what's going to happen to this? Will it drive all this stuff away? Will people become more careful and more cautious in the aftermath of the pandemic, and the sharing economy won't really take off in the way it was? It's mainly popular amongst younger generations, by the way. Okay, let's have a look at the next one. What's going to happen to the new economy? What's going to happen to the circular economy? We must quote, we must transform all the elements of the take, make, waste, in other words, make it and throw it away system, how we manage resources, how we make and use products, and what we do with the material afterwards. The circular economy, of course, is the other way around. You actually make stuff that can be reused and recycled. And by the way, at the bottom there is the credit for this, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Ellen MacArthur was actually a leading yachtswoman who actually became so fed up with the business models built around waste and depletion that she created this foundation, and she's become a sort of prophet, if you like, of the circular economy. But will we actually put it to one side now, saying this is not the time to, to change all the business models? Let's have another one more and see whether this one's going to last. And this one's probably a little bit more heavyweight. Industry 4.0 is, quote, some of you may not have come across this, most of you have. It's much bigger in Germany, by the way, where they have a much bigger industrial base than we do here. So there's more talk about it there. But it's a name for the trend of automation and data exchange in manufacturing technologies, including cyber physical systems, the Internet of Things, cloud, and all the rest of it. So if you look around the circle in this diagram, you'll see all the great disruptive technologies that we're really talking about here: autonomous robots, system integration, industrial Internet of Things, and so on. So what we're actually seeing, we can go ahead, we can actually see what you might call, a bit more history here, the fourth industrial revolution. The first one, of course, is the creation of mechanical looms and pumping out coal mines and so on. in the early and mid 18th century, and today we're looking ahead to our time and beyond to a fourth industrial revolution based on the use of cyber physical systems. So again, it's seen as the fourth industrial revolution, but is it, I ask, is it just a digital version of the previous three? Or is it something completely new which will enable us all to meet the targets of things like sustainability and quality and so on that we all want to have as part of our new future? Right, that's one set of disruption. The other half, the other disruptive factor, as I'd put it, is actually people, tomorrow's people. And there's some interesting things happening here. We're turning the coin over now to the other disruptive factor in this story. And the most important thing in this one is actually what you call a generational shift. Now, you've got all the generations here on the left. You've got the builders, then the baby boomers, which I'm probably part of, Generation X and Y and Z. And now, as you just get used to this generational map, along comes Generation Alpha. And people say, why is it called Generation Alpha? Well, it's pretty simple, actually. We've got to Generation Z. We've run out of letters of the alphabet, so we'll start all over again. And this is actually the beginning of a generational shift, because Generation Alpha, the little one on the right, actually summarizes people who were born after 2010. And so some of them are now 10 years old. Over the next 10 to 15 years, they'll be the people who mature into the characters who will be knocking on your door looking for work or looking for business, or they'll be going into university and second and tertiary education. The thing about this, though, is that they are totally different from previous generations, totally different. Have all become used to having them around. Once you've got used to having a Generation Alpha around, then of course here comes the next one. But have the next move on this one. Thanks. Generation Alpha, digital masters and critical consumers, the young activists, the creative entrepreneurs. And they are very different from their earlier forebears. They are, of course, the children of millennials, so their mum and dads are probably a digital natives up to a point. But actually, this young Generation Alpha character here, he or she is a digital native without even knowing about it, and they probably were almost before they were born. And so once you get used to Generation Alpha, ladies and gentlemen, the bad news is, next one here. Oh, just a summary here. Then let's have a quick summary. It's probably going to be the largest generation to date, expected to reach about 2 billion globally by 2025. They'll be the most educated generation in history. They're tech savvy. They adapt technologies faster. Artificial reality, artificial intelligence is their reality, and their learning is highly personalized. In other words, they are completely different from the generations that have gone before them. And then finally, next one, please. One thing is clear, technology will not only affect Generation Alpha's experiences of the world, it will also shape who they are. From Wired magazine, by the way, a very interesting article, that who they are, their identity, how they identify, how they see themselves, what do they want from their workplace and their consumer expectations, and so on. So that's the point. If companies and brands, and this is a message for all of you out there, if companies and brands wish to remain relevant and appealing to young people, Generation Alpha, they must stay on top of emerging technologies and be ahead of the curve, if you like. All the research tells us that when you fall behind the curve, you lose your young people, you lose your customers, because they want to go to new organizations where they are keeping ahead of the curve of technology and technological change. And then, as I said, the moment you get a handle on Generation Alpha, along comes the next one. But I think that's another story, and we'll leave that for another day, shall we? So what kind of working environment can these new generations expect? Because you'll be having to manage a workforce that's not only externalized possibly, but actually made up of 3, 4, or even 5 generations of people with completely different attitudes, different experiences, different viewpoints of what the workplace should be about. So what is the post-COVID workplace? Is it this Star Trek notion here, or the next one, or something like that? More Star Trek, if you like, or this one, or this one, robotics? Possibly. Optimistic. Probably rather more like this. There's the worker of the future with his or she kind of surgical mask, I'm afraid, become a sort of badge of tomorrow's workforce, possibly. And as Gartner put in a recent research report, the 9 future work trends post-COVID-19: more employees working remotely, increased use of employee data, greater role of the employer as a social safety net, and so on and so on and so on. I don't want to read all these things through like a school teacher, but if you do want a copy of this slide set, by the way, just ask the hosts today, and I know they'll be happy to pass it on to you. A recent report from Gallup, the polling organization, of course, 74% of the companies surveyed by Gallup are planning to permanently shift to more remote work after COVID-19 is sorted out. And one of the big questions, asking another question here, what are the implications for all of you, for managers and business owners, of an increasingly externalized workforce? After all, it does differ with culture, but a lot of people don't want to come back to the office. A recent survey of the difference between France and the UK, for example, discovered, it's only a few weeks ago, by the way, that 84% of French white-collar workers were actually back in the office. 84%. In the UK, it was just 40%. And indeed, at Bloomberg in London, they're actually offering their employees their £55 a day as a stipend, or a bribe if you like, to come back to the office to work. So it doesn't always map out the same for each culture, each economy. This another aspect I mentioned at the beginning, that it's really all to do about human behavior and human attitude and expectations. I'm indebted to Daniel Pink for this book called Drive, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us, because Daniel Pink did a hell of a lot of research for this in neurological institutes and psychological institutes and the rest, to find out what actually makes people want to go to work. And the first conclusion was behavioral science research suggests that optimal performance comes when people find intrinsic meaning in their work. It's not just the money. It's not just the money. And I think he's very scathing about traditional ways of looking at talent and potential as well. Quote from the book: too many organizations still operate from assumptions about human potential and individual performance that are outdated, unexamined, and rooted in folklore. It's all out of date. And I would imagine the accelerator effect, by the way, of COVID-19, as I mentioned earlier, the accelerator effect would probably make that even more noticeable, One thing that struck me, though, is how many books there are out there like these. A couple more, I think. There you go. Next one is actually, I've come across literally dozens of books recently aimed at liberating people from old traditional 9-to-5 office drudgery. I can't blame them either. The 7-Day Weekend, for example, in the middle, written by Ricardo Semler, who actually is a business owner and business leader. He runs a family-owned engineering company in Brazil. He's written several books, actually, another one called The Maverick, and 9-to-5 Cure, keep going on. Bonjour Paris, one of my favorites. It's a French book written by a French corporate lawyer about the company she found herself working for. Bonjour Paris, for some of you might not know, means hello laziness. And the book charts and describes the new trend amongst many French workers of actually doing the little possible work they can do for their employers, the least possible work every day. She got fired, by the way, as a result of that. And the final one, The Living Dead. Do we all think about this? I mean, offices themselves, I've always thought, are generally low productivity areas, and certainly can lead to an enormous, switched off, zoned out, the shocking truth about office life. Is it true? Will people say, I don't want to come back to work? I don't want to work 5 days a week. I want to work 3 or 2 or whatever it might be. So there you go. Don't write a book about it, by the way. You'll probably get the bullet. And moving on to a slightly more important area, really, of unlocking potential in the age of big data. What is big data? Well, big data is the stuff that comes from all these technologies. They're producing colossal amounts, unprecedented amounts of data, and they give us enormous analytical power. And I think if you can go to the next one, really you can see big data as what I would call the big oil of the 21st century. Oil shaped the 20th century. It created our neighborhoods and our roads and our garages, gas stations and motels, and of course the car itself. In the 21st century, its place will be taken, in my view, by big data. And what can we do with it? We can do an awful lot with it. But if you move on, thanks a lot. Big data is something that actually could get rid of people like me, because a lot of it is now increasingly analytical about future. Predictive analytics. And if you see on the right here, another historical comparison, if you like, this is what you might call the talent economy. And talent and leadership in the top column there, predictive talent models in HR analytics. In other words, using analytics to do the job that HR thought it did in the traditional manner. It's actually going to be, in the talent century, we'll use big data in a completely different way to work out more knowledge about our employee base or our partners, stakeholders, in terms of analyzing and identifying their talent and their potential. So if you move on, you see yet another book. I told you I read a lot. Talent Delusion, Why Data, Not Intuition, is the key to unlocking human potential. The point of the book actually trying to make is very simple. On the right, HR, human resources, sits on the biggest set of untapped data in any organization. In a world exploding with potential, the power of data-led insight is revolutionizing business decisions. And they say it's critical for the management of talent to predict not only whether they can do the job today, but whether they actually have the potential to do a particular job, probably a different one, in the future. And I'll give you a quick one-off case study here. Got my eye on the clock here a little bit. Merck Shark Dome, for example, they have a character called Jeremy Shapiro, and he actually is a great pioneer of people analytics, as he called it, and has summarized how he thinks it's progressed in the past 10 years, making it possible, you see. And this is what he thinks. I want our data scientists to think about the data, which is about people they are working with. Every single one of their data points, he says, has a mum, has a dad, has a family, has motivations, has a career goal in place, and so on. And if you're not paying respect to your employees, then you're not doing justice to the organization. The most exciting thing, he says, about HR is thinking through talent strategy. And I think you'll probably find that many of you, some of you, particularly if you have a family business and looking at areas like succession and so on, these are very important factors to consider, in my view. So analytics, big data analytics is going to make a difference in the way we look at the whole development of talent and the identification of potential. So I thought I'd move on finally, really, to this area, which actually, as SMEs, what's going to be out there in tomorrow's world? Are you going to keep on doing the same stuff, the same products, the same services, the same customers? Or are you going to look at the opportunities of tomorrow and say, actually, we need to move sideways. We need to move laterally and see what's out there. And there's some very exciting possibilities. Internet economy, space industry, advanced manufacturing, life sciences, the well-being market. There's just 5 of them. There are dozens. I'll just go through those very, very quickly. Let's have a quick look at the internet economy. And I'm indebted here to a very, very interesting report by the Boston Consulting Group, and it's called From High Web to No Web, Opportunities for SMEs. And the point they're making there, and as they say here, across 11 of the G20 countries, high web SMEs, companies that use a lot of web, in other words, very web generated, very web driven, have experienced revenue growth up to 22% higher than that achieved by SMEs with lower or no use of the web. And I can't imagine many businesses these days who are in a position where they're not using any web connections at all. I can't believe that at all. But there is a difference. In the UK, sales at high web companies, the report says, increased 6 times as fast as revenues of firms with no internet presence. And so I think that's something to start thinking about. Ask yourself the question, are we, as a business, are we high web, medium web, low web, or no web? Here's an example, retailing. We all know this. I don't think I bought a thing in a shop for the past 6 months, actually. In 2020 alone, the pandemic pushed online shopping past 30% for the first time ever. It could well pass 50 or even 60% by 2030. Don't know. It doesn't spell good news for the high street, does it? And I'd like to see high streets renovated and rejuvenated. So Matt, perhaps we'll find a way round the movement, massive movement towards online shopping by thousands, millions of consumers out there. Okay, let's move on to another area of opportunity. And I'm sure one or two of you might be saying, the space industry, we haven't got one. Excuse me. I think it's one of the best kept secrets in the UK, actually. The UK space industry, as I say there in the top bullet point, the size of the space industry in the UK trebled since 2010. Past 10 or 11 years, it's increased 300-fold or 3 times. It's planned to be a 40 billion annual sector by 2030, generating something like 100,000 jobs and will form about 10% of the global market for space technology and space products. And it's driven almost entirely by SMEs, by smaller companies, many of which probably have moved over from other business plans. I won't go through all of them, but here is a list of them if you want to see them. 3DO, they're in space data, 4Link, spacecraft communications, AB5 consulting, space project management, aerospace, Cornwall. Well, that looks after practically everything in the space industry future for Cornwall. They're into RD&I, as they call it, research, development and innovation. And Cornwall could well be a place where we have our first spaceports, either there or in Scotland, in the northern part of Scotland, where the topography and the geography is ideal for actually having spaceports. And so this is an industry which has colossal potential. Colossal potential. Have a look at it. Some of you might even be in the supply chain already. Here's an example of the research that's going forward. I recommend this for a bit of light reading over the holiday season, I suppose. Securing Our Future in Space put together this report by UK Space, the Space Trade Association, and it's got a lot of very impressive stuff in it. And I get very excited when I look at the whole future for the space sector in the UK and worldwide. And that's partly because I suppose futurologists, love all that thing about going to other planets and whatever. Okay, staying on this planet though, if we move on, the whole notion of tomorrow's factory 2050, that is actually not a photograph on the left, is actually an artist's impression, I think. But the Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre associated with the University of Sheffield is actually a centre of excellence of worldwide quality in taking us to the next generation of manufacturing capability. It's an important step, it says, towards development of the region's advanced manufacturing innovation district. Very important, I think, and actually will be Europe's largest research-led advanced manufacturing cluster. So very impressive. When you start looking more closely at these things, you realize things you never thought about before. And you might think, well, that's not for the likes of us. We don't actually have any associations with the likes of AMRC, but I think you should take a closer look. If we can just move on to the next one, I'll tell you why we've moved on, is because this is the other half, really. SMEs and the fourth industrial revolution. Yes, the fourth industrial revolution will generate factories that have very few people in them, but there will be people. And if you look at the next picture, you see here, which I'm a little bit worried when I put this in, because I noticed that she's in danger of getting her hair caught in the machine, but I'm sure she knows what she's doing. But people say, well, it's, SMEs and, all these very advanced manufacturing stuff. It's fine, but we're not big enough for that. I don't think we'd be interested in what they have to offer. But actually, it's quite the opposite. Shirley Harrison is one of the senior people at the Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre, actually puts it in a nutshell. AMRC is committed to working with smaller companies, from startups through to established businesses, giving them access, as she says, to the full suite of advanced facilities and capabilities. So really, tomorrow's world, is very much an SME economy. There's no question about that. It's a question of how people and how companies will seize the opportunities that it brings forward. A couple of other quick opportunity areas. One of them, of course, is the area that we sometimes realize we're good at and sometimes don't. This is actually the Wellcome Genome Campus just outside Cambridge. I've actually been there. I've actually spoken there, not about genomes. I don't know much about them, but spoken at that institute, and very impressive it is. It's named after Frederick Sanger, the Sanger Institute, named after Frederick Sanger, a British scientist who was given, one of the very few who's ever given 2 Nobel Prizes for the work. But what they're into there is all about genome sequencing and so on. And actually, if you look currently, look at the impact that places like Wellcome Genome Campus have had on the development of vaccines, because part of vaccine development is, of course, about genome sequencing, then they have been playing an absolutely central role, bang in the middle of it. Give you a sense of how big these places are. This is a very, very fancy campus, is it not? There's some of the buildings there. Very well worth the visit if you ever have spare time or you ever live in the area. And this is really putting the nutshell here about the UK life sciences sector. It's an industry of the future. It's already very, very big, though. And this is from a report by the Bioindustry Association. I think it's called Life Sciences, Catalyzing Investment and Growth. Bit heavyweight, but if you Google it, it's all there online. The life sciences sector is a major contributor to UK PLC, generating over £73 billion a year, supporting nearly 500,000 jobs. 2/3 of which, and this is the important bit, 2/3 of which are outside London and the Southeast, and it consists of almost 5,900 companies, 80% of which are SMEs. And so many of these SMEs, it says, are improving productivity through the development of disruptive technologies such as AI, artificial intelligence, genomics, and engineering biology. The impact of these disruptive technologies is enabling the sector to grow rapidly. And so here again, infinite opportunities to spread your own business plans and build new business models, looking at moving into new product areas or new areas of device. Or become part of the supply chain in some other way. So again, well worth a look. And finally, something you might not think about, the wellness economy. The wellness economy, what's that? Well, it's big. Top left of this little chart, for example, the top 5 sectors of the $4.2 trillion worldwide global wellness industry. And why? It's everything from healthy eating to care and beauty, to wellness tourism, to fitness and mind and body, personalized medicine, all of those. And here again, we've seen the impact of the COVID accelerator, have we not? Quote, current health and wellness trends and opportunities in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic are widespread, with a surge in symptom tracking solutions, digital medical guidance, home therapy, and products that support a healthy immune system and balanced diet. Finally, according to the Global Wellness Institute, yes, there is one, the Global Wellness Institute. It's a very big business. COVID-19, he says, is a wake-up call to the world. This wake-up call is arguably the main reason why the wellness industry has experienced such an increase in demand. So there you go again. You see the accelerator, the COVID accelerator effect at work in this particular industry. And it is a colossal industry, one of the biggest now in the world, and very, very vital for our general well-being. But not just general well-being in an everyday sense. It's actually to do with your workplace. It's not just about spas and yoga and healthy eating and going on holiday to healthy places, if you like. It's actually more to do with the workplace itself and what well-being means in terms of running a more successful business, and of course looking after your employees, very important. Roughly 70 million workdays in the UK, this is roughly 70 million workdays were lost in 2019 due to mental health issues at a cost to employers of £2.5 billion, and that was before the COVID-19 pandemic, of course, hit. And the point here, something we don't often think about, certainly older generations, increasing happiness has been shown to increase productivity in a company by 12 to 14%. And now with most of the working population of the UK, as many of you will know, most of you will know, employed by SMEs, that's 5.5 million SMEs employing around 16 million people, the future of the UK's economy depends on the productivity of all these companies, and that comes down to things like looking after your workforce and looking after their well-being. And I think well-being in this sense will become a major factor in management development in the years to come. It's there in its earlier, I think, infantile days. I think it will grow to become incredibly central, incredibly important. Okay, well, I'll close then with a quick look at the generalized, because all we've done there is look at five business areas that are pretty obvious winners. But if you look at this picture, it's the kind of image of urban life, of community life that I'd like to see develop personally, one based on the reduction of waste, sustainable policies of water conservation, of much more local food production. You can see that in the middle at the local food store, and buildings, towns that are much more livable, as I'd call them, livable. Part of my work is actually sitting on the expert panel of something called the Future Spaces Foundation, not space, but spaces. And it's to do with the community that we'll build in the years ahead. And it includes things like clean technology, sustainable farming, human scale communities, all of these things, apart from things like 3D printing, renewable energy, energy storage or whatever. Energy storage, absolutely vital in the years ahead. Why? Because most of the changes I've been talking about will demand more and more electricity, whether it's an electric car or an electric aircraft or an electric community. More and more electricity will have to be generated, and we'll have to find better ways, but preferably by renewable energy forms. But it will be, the more we make, the more we'll have to store. And I think we've got to spend a lot of time and energy on that challenge there of creating energy storage capabilities that will actually look after all this electricity. So that's the kind of world I'd like us all to live in the future. And I think there must be endless opportunities for go-ahead innovative businesses to find new niches. And I've looked at this in the recent past. It's not just when companies become high web, they don't simply high web in a very high level way, a high technological way. I've looked at companies that manufacture Wellington boots for gardening, or a company in Scotland that sells tartans online. They have revolutionized their business models. They've revolutionized their business prospects, if you like, by becoming medium and high web organizations. So I'll leave you with that thought, and I will just close with, as I said earlier, it's all about not answers, but questions. Are you asking the right questions? And here's an example. Henry Ford, who of course we all know invented mass production car manufacturing. He said, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Good point. So moving on, when you can't see what's coming, and this is my message today, when you can't see what's coming, how will you plan your next step? You know, better the question, better the answer. And I'll close with this very last thought. The key, ladies and gentlemen, is to embrace disruption and change early. Don't react to it decades later. You just can't fight innovation. And that's my comments today. So I'll say to all of you now, welcome to the future and good luck on your journey. Thanks. Sue.
James, thank you very much for a very thought-provoking, interesting talk. Very, very much appreciated, as indeed I'm sure it has been by our audience today. One question that somebody has just raised, which was that a car of today in the world of 2050 on your slide?
Oh, in the flying car, you mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I think, well, I think that's more like 2035 rather than 2050. Yeah. And I hope by then we won't have to have cars because we'll all live in neighborhoods. But that's my own personal dream of having workable, livable, walkable neighborhoods which are built and designed for healthy living. They haven't been. They've been designed really for cars and trucks to move around on, and where distance was the enemy. So no, I think it's a bit earlier than that, 2030. I think 2030, Sue, as onward, 2030, 2040 is going to be an absolutely fascinating decade anyway, because from my point of view, as a futurologist or futurist obsessed with space travel, as I am, it will be the decade in which we will, we hope, colonize the moon, colonize the Mars. Certainly the NASA Mars program starts about 2030. They've already hired the young potential astronauts for that, and they will be, going up to space. And often we think astronauts as a sort of scientists with too many PhDs in electronics, but actually the first people who colonized Mars could well be farmers. I don't know if you've seen a wonderful movie by, I'm wearing my BAFTA hat now. It's called The Martian by Ridley Scott. It's Matt Damon who gets stranded on Mars when his mates leave because they think he's been killed. So they leave for Earth, and he's left to live on Mars on his own. He's not an astronaut, he's a botanist, and he grows his own food and all the rest of it. I won't tell you the rest if you haven't seen it. It's a lovely, fascinating film. Being Hollywood, I suppose it has a really decent ending as well. But there you go.
That's a good recommendation of people to catch over the weekend, maybe. But also turn to some other thoughts that have been spurred by your talk, James. The last 12 months has seen a lot more governmental intervention globally. As governments have grappled with how they deal with the pandemic from the point of view of their populations and so on. How do you see that going forward? Do you think that this sort of interventionist trend will continue, or do you see it as very much a one-off? Because I mean, it's unprecedented, isn't it? Particularly.
Yes, it is unprecedented. Well, it's a wild card. It's a wild card or a black swan event. Out of interest, by the way, in passing, 9/11 was a black swan event as well, and it did change so many other things as well. My concern here, because I'm not a great believer in high levels of intervention, government central intervention, but my worry here is that, and it's certainly true of the British government, by the way, that they have become so sensitive about appearing to be failing or not doing the right thing at the right time that they'll overcompensate by being more interventionist. I hope not. I don't think it makes the right way forward in general. But how would it affect the world that you work in then, Sue? I mean, I'm not turning the tables on you at all, but is it something that you would not welcome, a more interventionist culture? That's
very interesting. I think, personally, I think it would be an enemy of innovation.
Yes.
In terms of onward development of businesses.
Yes.
Because too much red tape and so on, and intervention, it is very, very much controls that and constrains that. And I think one of the big things that we have seen, of course, over the last few months, or the last 12 months, of course, is the massive amount of collaboration there has been amongst companies in order to resolve such things as the vaccine delivery.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. Unfortunately, without treading on anybody's toes here, we haven't seen a great deal of collaboration internationally, have we?
I mean,
the whole thing about vaccine diplomacy,
Well, I think there has been until very recently, actually. And I suspect, talking to people within the industry, there's been a lot of company and corporate global collaboration. But it will be interesting. So in terms of business, then, so looking forward, because of course we're looking at business, although our businesses are very much set in a societal framework. Do you think that COVID has done something important in terms of accelerating development for our businesses?
Yes, I do. Yes, and my message, actually, Sue, today is, and if your delegates don't do anything else as a takeaway, it is actually to look constantly at their business models, constantly at their products and their services, and actually ask that basic question. More questions, I'm afraid. That basic question: can we go laterally? Can we go into other sectors, not on the back of this experience, but find some other well of experience, if you like, which can enable them to move across to other areas? All the sectors I picked up on there, certainly the 5 main ones, or 4.5 with the internet economy, all of them are open to lateral shifts, I think. And if you look at the history of companies, I'm a great student of corporate history. If you look at, say, General Electric, for example, well, I mean, General Electric was launched in the late 19th century to make, by Edison, to make light bulbs and to generate electricity. If you look today, they don't have anything to do with electricity. In fact, they're normally in the Fortune 500 list, they're bunched under miscellaneous financials, I think now. So they have evolved continually over time. And although they're going through a bad patch in the past few years, I know, particularly after Jack Welch went, that is a lesson there, I think, of that your people, your delegates today can take away with them, that it's always important to move on. And the earlier thing about disruptive technologies, the famous economist Joseph Schumpeter in the 1930s referred to it as creative destruction, not negative, but creative destruction, where it was the process by which you innovate and you renew the economic model and you renew the economic landscape and move on to new businesses and new industries even. If we didn't do any of this, we would still be riding around on horses, I think, as Henry Ford sort of commented there. And I think you've got to be more adventurous. I've generally noticed that most business leaders don't spend a great deal of time thinking about the future, and that's not because they're daft or something. It's because they're very busy, and they have priorities to make their numbers and to look after and manage their teams and so on. And so if you don't have a sense of the future and you think it's something that happens to other people or other organizations, as I mentioned earlier, then it doesn't really go anywhere. It should be the great energizing dynamic, I think, of any business, to keep constantly looking at other opportunities. And the positive part of, say, the generational shift I mentioned, Generation Alpha and that lot, is that they are like that. They are constantly looking at, they were born with a digital spoon in their mouths, if you like, and it's for them, it's normal to want to look beyond to other areas of technology and other opportunities and to think laterally. And most of the big successful businesses, whether it's eBay or Facebook, they started on the kitchen table. They started on the smallest possible level. So my message there is to delegates today is you've got to keep your eye on the future. It's, there's something called the 7 deadly sins, which I won't go into now, but about how not to run a company. But one of them is actually, how do you make sure that your employees or your staff, your teams, have meaningful work? To take the drive mentioned, Daniel Pink's book, that they want to do meaningful work. Well, there's such a thing as meaningless work as well. And that's a great danger, I think, to companies as they try to move forward, is that they give people jobs that are meaningless, or they treat them in a negative way, or indeed they actually expect their employees to put up with a gap between their values and the company's values. I think it's a very important area, that whole area of values as well. So I'm heaping quite a lot to think about onto people today, and I apologize for that. But I think it's this whole thing about constantly looking at the next 5 and 10 years and saying, where do we want to be? The research tells me that a lot of companies don't even have a long-term vision. About 40% plus, I think, don't have a long-term vision, or at least if you have a long-term vision, stick to it. But they don't. Actually, many of them admit that we don't really have one. Where do you want to be in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, and how do you plan to get there? And how will you create a plan that gives you measurables, where you know how you're doing along the journey, and it's that sort of thing. So I think a lot of it's up in the brain box. It's not on the factory floor or in the front office. It's actually up in the mentality and the expectations. That's why I keep saying it's the sociology that's more important now, I think, than anything else. I hope that's a bit jumbled, I know, but I hope it sort of got there. It's a call to action, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Final question, James. You talked about wellness and the importance of wellness in the wellness industry, if I might call it that. But do we run a risk that we create through the sort of wellness policies and so on, that we create two societies? So we have those who are engaged with and perhaps are more affluent, who are able to pursue some of these wellness policies and so on. And then we have other people who are, struggling to survive, basically. And I think we've seen this with COVID, that it's particularly prevalent in areas of higher poverty and deprivation. And what, do you see the wellness spur, if you like, emphasising that further, or can those two come together?
No, I agree with you. I think it is a danger, and it does worry me. As I mentioned briefly, very briefly in my session, I'm a great believer in using good architectural design, for example, to create communities that are inherently healthy. The walkable neighborhood. There's primitive prototypes in the States, for example, of the 20-minute neighborhood. What on earth is that? Well, the 20-minute, it's in Portland, Oregon, as it happens. What is it? It's a 20-minute neighborhood. It's a neighborhood in which everything, all the amenities and so on, are within 20 minutes walking distance. And that's a completely different idea from a commuter-based country, isn't it? So, yes, COVID, as you say quite rightly, has exposed the gaps between the well-off and the less well-off, or the not well-off at all, and in fact has accentuated. If my numbers are right, the rich have got richer in the UK since COVID started. How they've done that, I don't know. I wish I knew. But I think we've got to be much more holistic and comprehensive about this. It's really the way we develop communities and the neighborhoods that they live in, and they should be much more unified, much more integrated. Will we get it? That's a very Herculean thing. But then, what would we do? What did we do before the welfare state was developed? And the welfare state itself, with the NHS and all the other amazing things that came from it, and the higher education policies and so on, that was a remarkable revolution, social revolution. I think we forget that. We haven't had one on that scale since. It would be nice if one of the great gifts of the COVID years, or year, who knows, it would be that we do trigger some kind of a social revolution where we're all nicer to each other, where we're all in the wellness thing together. Am I an optimist? 50-50, actually, I'm afraid. 50-50. I don't think it's going to be a disaster, but we've got to keep our eye on it, haven't we? We have. You mentioned more interventionist governments and so on earlier. I'm not sure what they can do. It doesn't seem to work, actually, what they can do to change that, to improve the situation. But certainly wellness is in danger, I agree, of being a toy for the better off.
Good. Well, thank you so much, James, for all your thoughts and input for today. I'm sure that all of the audience would join me in applauding you. If we'd been in a more physical environment, of course, you'd have heard a round of applause, but thank you again for everything. And thank you very much to the audience for joining us over lunchtime today. And if you have any further questions in relation to these exciting topics that James has been talking about, then please do post them to us on the site, and we will relay those to James, who will hopefully be able to come back to you on those points. But thank you all very much, and have a good rest of the afternoon. Our next session starts at 2 o'clock, and we look forward to seeing you then.